Move over Apple and Microsoft. There's a new king of the tech world and the global markets. A company that's been having its moment in the sun for quite some time now. It shot to fame recently and has seen a meteoric rise in its stock price as the world woke up to AI. No prizes for guessing that it's indeed Nvidia that I'm talking about. So on Tuesday, this happened.
Nvidia has officially passed Apple and Microsoft as the world's most valuable company.
Shares of the chipmaker climbed 3.6% on Tuesday, lifting the company's market cap to $3.34 trillion.
Nvidia has more than doubled, more than tripled year to date. It's astounding. Right now, $3.35 trillion market value. It's added $2.1 trillion in market value this year.
Looks like there's going to be a real battle now between the likes of Microsoft and Apple and all those other big tech giants in the US. They all want to be the most valuable company.
It is Nvidia's world and we're living in it.
That could very well be true. Nvidia's GPUs or graphics processing units are integral to the development of AI and are being gobbled up by the biggest in the business, be it Microsoft, Meta or Google. This crazy demand for GPUs has led to Nvidia's stock price surging nearly 182% this year alone. Oh, and this is after it more than tripled in 2023. That's total returns of close to 600,000% since its IPO in 1999, including reinvested dividends. Yes, 600,000%. That's some rally, huh? Yes, because it makes Nvidia the best performing Nasdaq stock in the last 25 years. So what explains this rise? How has the CEO, Jensen Huang, steered the company to reach this milestone? Is Nvidia going to be the poster child of the tech world now? What differentiates it from the likes of Microsoft and Apple? And can Nvidia retain this top spot? As AI becomes more advanced and an integral part of our modern lives, what is the kind of growth that Nvidia can expect? Why are GPUs so crucial? Is there space for other players to make a mark? Where does India fit into Nvidia's strategy? Find out all of this and much more as we speak to ACE analyst Bob O'Donnell to trace the company's journey and find out what makes them such a crucial piece of the AI puzzle. It's Thursday, June 20th. I'm your host, Diya Rekhi, and you are listening to How Nvidia Became the World's Most Valuable Company, only on the Morning Brief from the Economic Times. Nvidia is nothing more or less than the poster boy of the AI revolution. As AI became bigger and bigger, so did Nvidia. And if you wanted any more proof of how all-encompassing AI is, Google CEO Sundar Pichai mentioned the word 120 times in his presentation at the recent I/O event.
That might be a record in how many times someone has said AI. AI, 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 AI.
I found the AI really useful.
AI, generative AI.
But anyway, why is Nvidia so integral to the AI world? Well, because it makes more than 80% of the world's GPU chips which power AI. The chips are widely being touted as the new gold or oil in the tech sector. But before I proceed any further, let me break down what a GPU chip really is. A GPU is a specialized processor that was originally designed to accelerate graphics rendering. They can process many pieces of data simultaneously, which makes them extremely useful for machine learning, video editing, and gaming applications. So why are they important when it comes to AI? It's because the GPU architecture offers unmatched computational speed and and efficiency, making it the backbone of many AI advancements. For example, these chips are used in data centers that back models like OpenAI's ChatGPT. But it isn't like Nvidia was thinking of these chips for AI applications from the get-go in 1993, okay? Nvidia spent its first few decades focusing mainly on producing chips for computer games. For years, its name was limited to the gaming cult. But that changed. During the 2000s, Nvidia President Jensen Huang directed the company to invest heavily in developing GPUs for use in applications besides gaming, setting it up to capitalize on the emergence of AI. The rest, as they say, was history. In March this year, Nvidia announced its most powerful Blackwell GPU chip capable of processing trillion parameter AI models up to 30 times faster and at 1/4 use of power compared to its predecessor. Now, that just sounds like a lot of numbers and very complicated, but I will say it sounds extremely powerful, which explains why the Blackwell chips are said to be used by Amazon Web Services, Dell Technologies, Google, Meta, Microsoft, OpenAI, Oracle, Tesla, and XAI. Gosh, I'm out of breath, but that pretty much is the who's who of the tech world. Also, how can such a massive story not have an India angle, right? Well, the Blackwell chips will also be powering India's Shakti Cloud offering by the Hiranandani Group's data center arm Yota Data Services, which localizes end-to-end data storage requirements of governments and enterprises. Yota said it plans to install over 20,400 Nvidia GPU-based supercomputers. Now, they're not the only ones. Reliance Industries is collaborating with Nvidia to create AI language models and generative apps for millions of Reliance Jio users. Last year, Nvidia also tied up with Tata Group companies like Tata Motors, Tata Consultancy Services, and Tata Communications. Nvidia will work with Tata Motors to deploy AI in design, styling, engineering, simulation testing, and autonomous vehicle capabilities. It will help Tata Communications build AI infrastructure, while TCS will use Nvidia's AI infrastructure and capabilities to build and process generative AI applications, as well as upskill its 6 lakh plus workforce. Of course, steering this story is Huang. Let me just say that amidst all of the big giants and their chiefs, Huang, with his black leather jacket and wispy grey hair, is the new age tech rockstar no one knew they needed. The 61-year-old bespectacled Taiwanese American is now the 11th richest person in the world, as his net worth increased by more than $4 billion to touch $119 billion on Tuesday, as per reports. Oh, and he's also overtaken Reliance's Mukesh Ambani to seal this spot.
Every company makes mistakes, and I make a lot of them.
AI is not going to take your jobs. The person who uses AI is going to take your job. So use AI as fast as you can so that you could stay gainfully employed. Do something that the world's never done before. Let's hope that it's insanely hard to do. People who can suffer are ultimately the ones that are the most successful.
To understand the most enduring story of the tech world today, we have with us Bob O'Donnell, President of Tech Analysis Research.
I've been a tech industry analyst for about 25 years, covering the major trends in the tech industry, following the big tech companies that entire time. I worked for a while at a company called IDC, and about 10 and a half years ago started my own firm. Really pleased to be with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you, Bob. Can we start off with asking you to give us an idea of the genesis of Nvidia in a sense? I mean, what were its beginnings like, and what has this journey been like to being the most valuable company in the world as of yesterday?
Yeah, it's fascinating. You know, when I started as an industry analyst at IDC, my first role was actually to follow graphics cards and monitors. So ironically, I've been following Nvidia in some way, shape, or form for about 25 years, most of its history. And that's where the company started. They started out doing graphics cards, particularly designed for gaming, for PCs. So GPUs were a new type of chip architecture, graphics processing units, that's what it stands for. And they were meant as a supplement to the CPU, or the central processing unit, the primary processor inside a computer and phone and all these other devices. And as we move towards more graphical interfaces, and then of course graphical games, there was a recognition that there needed to be a different kind of chip than the CPU to do that extra work. And that's where GPUs came from. And so Nvidia was one of the first. There were several other companies at the time competing to create these GPUs. So that's their start. And then they, obviously evolved quite a bit over time.
Absolutely. But if I may ask, Bob, how has Nvidia really maintained this virtual monopoly over GPU chips? You mentioned that there were other players, but what really happened that led to them being such a huge player and like dominating the market in a sense? I'm sure there are others that want to break into the space. So, what is the barrier that's really stopping companies from possibly reaching this scale and size?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the simple answer is software. So what NVIDIA did in the early days is the important software for graphics cards early on were simply called drivers. There's a kind of software that's used to enable a chip to work. And NVIDIA would create very high quality drivers for their hardware. And then over time, that allowed them to compete in the graphics space. And one of the companies they used to compete with was another Canadian company called ATI that AMD bought many years ago, again, initially for graphics. And eventually the market shook out down to those two primary players. But what happened with NVIDIA that was different is they recognized early on that they could use graphics chips to do this work. Even though they weren't originally designed for that, they figured out a way to do that, because what the primary characteristic of a GPU is the fact that it can do multiple operations in parallel. And it turns out that's exactly the kind of work that you need to do early forms of AI, most of which revolved around graphics. So some of those early efforts around AI involve things like the ability to recognize dog pictures versus cat pictures. It was kind of funny, really, but that's what they did. So that's why these developers originally started working with GPUs. And what we've seen over the last 10 plus years is the rapid evolution of neural networks into what they call adversarial networks and other types of networks. So we're all different forms of AI. And early on in the process, NVIDIA created something called CUDA. And CUDA is it's a development language. It's like an operating system sort of for GPUs. This CUDA development software is what allowed GPUs to become, and NVIDIA GPUs in particular, just to be clear, the standard. And ever since then, people have been playing catch up. Then once that started catching on, NVIDIA started creating other software. Some of it allowed them specifically to work with this new set of what were called foundation or transformer models. That was the early version of what we're seeing now with generative AI.
Sure. And we keep hearing about this insatiable demand for GPUs, right? And I wanted to understand a little bit more from you about what this demand is really like. Any numbers or projections that you could give us with regard to how you see this going?
The one way to put it, I mean, I don't have the specific numbers. There's plenty that have been published with regard to that. It's in the billions and billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, I should say, I believe. But the bigger thing is right now, it's about a year wait to get these chips. I mean, that tells you what it is, in an era when you can find most of the other chips pretty readily. I mean, we've made it through, after we made it through the pandemic, where there are obviously a lot of supply hiccups in semiconductors and other industries. Now that's been resolved. But when it comes to these high-end graphics cards, there's like literally like a year-long wait to get them because again, to do this work for companies who say, we want to be involved with generative AI, they have to have access to these GPUs. And so there's been a huge line that's been forming.
And through the time that you've been covering NVIDIA, they've really been performing exceedingly well off late, with their earnings and so on. Could you give us some of the biggest highlights recently or the kind of growth that they've seen, especially when it comes to their top line and revenue and so on?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's happened with Nvidia, again, thanks to the CUDA software and now some of the other software tools that they've created, is they're able to charge basically pretty much whatever they want. So you're seeing profit margins, close to 80% for these chips. And these chips, by the way, cost tens of thousands of dollars. So each one of them makes a ton of money for them. They're building the chips and they're continuing to innovate them. Every 2 years is what they've typically been. And now they're moving to try and speed that up because, Jensen is a strong competitor. He knows, what's happening out there. He's figured out the important things he needs to do. He wants to make sure that the company, stays on track and evolves. Now, is it going to last forever? Of course not. Nothing does in tech. But right now, what they've done has been incredible. And the runway, in the near term future, 12, 18 months for sure, looks pretty good.
Sure. And you mentioned Jensen in your answer right here. And I wanted to take a little bit more time to understand the kind of impact that his leadership has really had to bring NVIDIA where it is today. I mean, he seems to be someone who isn't really a fan of, 5-year plans and feels that now is the perfect time. So how much of an impact has that really had on NVIDIA's success?
Well, it's been a huge impact. I would say Jensen's biggest skill is his ability to recognize the importance of things very early on. And we've seen this several steps along the way. And so what he's done is he saw and he's very smart and very kind of academically minded. Sometimes when you hear him speak, he sort of takes on a bit of a professorial type of tone. Not in a bad way, just because he likes to talk about things and he knows how it works and he likes to explain how it works. So, and you can tell the way his brain kind of works is basically he can see certain things and he has a good sense for what sort of things are going to be important. So he jumps on those opportunities and then follows them very passionately and drives people to get that done. And he's a very personable guy. So, he likes to go out and meet and talk to people. And lately I've been joking, he's been on sort of his stadium tour. He's been sort of called the Taylor Swift of tech because, he's very popular and he's out doing these speeches all over the place. And interestingly, I was in Taiwan for Computex a couple of weeks ago, and he's of Taiwanese heritage. He was born there. And very much, still associates himself with some things, with companies and people there. And he was treated like a rock star. It was unbelievable to see the media following him around and people following him around while he was there. And he's just taken on this sort of iconic status in the tech industry.
Right. In fact, it's funny you mentioned that because I was at a conference in Barcelona very recently and he was supposed to come down for that, but unfortunately he couldn't because I think he was busy with Computex, and the leadership of that company said, unfortunately, there's only one Jensen. We can't have him everywhere. So he's literally at every event and everyone wants a piece of Jensen, it seems. Yeah. But
that's exactly what's happening.
Taylor Swift of tech is a great way to put it. Yeah. Coming back to NVIDIA, Bob, I wanted to understand what is the way forward that you see NVIDIA taking going forward, in the sense that do you see them just riding this AI wave where they were ahead of the curve to see it and so now it's their time to shine? Or do you think that they're already looking at the next big thing?
They're clearly looking at the next big thing. And one area in particular, for example, is robotics. Now that we've started to see some of the ideas around artificial intelligence and generative AI being applied to robotics, I think you're going to see them becoming an important factor in that field as well. And they have a lot of research happening in a number of places. So again, autonomous driving was one of them, robotics, medical industry. They're working on a number of things in the medical industry as well. So anywhere where this idea of really needing advanced computing is somewhere that they're looking at and trying to apply themselves to.
Sure. Just one thing before we get to the whole India aspect, Bob. We've seen a lot of talk about regulating AI globally. Regulators are really coming down heavily on tech companies regarding the use of AI in different ways. So, do you see this having any impact on Nvidia, or are they sort of shielded from this impact because they're providers of the chips in a sense?
It's a great question, and I do think they'll be impacted. I think everyone would be impacted because there is, questions about how this technology gets deployed because it is so capable. The amount of capability, frankly, scares a lot of people, and there is a concern of how far can this go if it's not being watched. Now, to your point, they are a step or two back because they are providing the chips, but nevertheless, any types of efforts towards regulation are going to impact them in a big way, especially because, as I think you mentioned early on, I mean, they have like 90% share in the accelerated computing market, if not more. And so if there's a slowdown in general, because they have such a huge share, that would obviously have a big impact on them. So I think that's something, everybody in the industry and certainly Nvidia is going to be watching very closely. And I would imagine they've got efforts, to help and get involved with some of these regulatory bodies. They typically haven't been thought of very much as a sort of a political company, but obviously, I think when it impacts their business, I'm sure they have people who are looking at these kinds of things and are involved. And yes, again, I think that would be an impact, but I think a lot of it would be, to their customers, frankly, that would be more impacted than Nvidia probably would.
Understood. The other thing, Bob, that we really wanted to get your thoughts on is what sort of an impact is India going to have when it comes to Nvidia's larger strategy? We see that there's a lot of interest from tech companies when it comes to India for talent, for the market that it provides, and so on. We've also seen Jensen come into India, meet the Prime Minister as well recently. So, and they've inked quite a few deals with some of the largest names in India. So, where do you see India really fitting in to Nvidia's larger strategy?
Well, I mean, I think India is going to play an incredibly important role because, first of all, obviously, India is famous for all the software development work that gets done there. And as with most big tech companies, Nvidia has a large presence there of its own employees who are doing some of that work. The other thing is, as companies like here, I was at this HPE event that they announced a deal with Nvidia, and part of that is to work with large system integrators like HCL and Wipro, a number of these Indian-based companies who are helping companies build their own generative AI. Because the big trend that's really driving things recently is the fact that companies themselves of all types in all industries are saying, how do we deploy this generative AI technology? And a lot of them are turning to large system integrators, many of which, of course, are based in India to do that work. And then the other thing that Jensen has done recently, and for example, in meeting with the Prime Minister, he's recognized and has made the point to say this idea of sovereign data and people having data that belongs to the country and is best for the country, and therefore there should be data centers that are leveraging local sovereign data. And he's selling this idea around the world. So, and with India's enormous presence, that's going to be incredibly important to them. And I think you're going to see they could use India as a great example if that development continues of the types of data that theoretically could be leveraged and how the benefits they could provide to consumers, Indian consumers and businesses in a huge way.
Sure. We've seen that with other companies like Apple, which again is among the topmost, most valuable companies in the world. They had a huge presence in China, and now we're seeing this move towards sort of diversifying away from China and India becoming more pivotal in that sense. How much of a presence does Nvidia have in China? And is there going to be some kind of move away if they have like a significant presence there?
They do have a presence there, but it's not as large as it has been for other, as say, for example, Apple, right? Because up till now, most of the products that Nvidia sold to consumers were graphics gaming cards. And gaming is very popular in China, and that's important, but it's a tiny fraction now of Nvidia's business. So the bigger concern with Nvidia in China is the fact that we've seen restrictions from the US government in particular around preventing the export of very powerful GPUs, because they don't want those GPUs to fall into the hands of the Chinese government, because they're concerned of the types of applications they would potentially use them for. So the biggest China factor for Nvidia is the restriction of sales of some of their most high-end GPUs. But they've been dealing with that for probably the last 18 months to 2 years anyway. And they're figuring out ways to do it.
Sure, but geopolitically, you would say India is better positioned than China?
I think
Right.
geopolitically, as far as Nvidia is concerned in particular, India is definitely better positioned than China in that regard.
Nvidia is officially one of the biggest wealth creators in the world ever. And I thought it's important to talk to someone whom it's made rich. Reese Williams, chief strategist and portfolio manager at Wave Capital, is one of the company's earliest investors. I asked Reese what made him choose that $12 stock way back in 1999. It was a time when Nvidia was just a GPU maker envisaged by three friends in a roadside diner. And of course, AI was decades from becoming a revolution.
Well, Nvidia at the time had the best graphic processing chip, and you may remember 1999, the late 90s is when some of these new, Sony PlayStations and then even PC gaming really started to expand. Prior to that, the video quality in computer games really wasn't that great, and it was really Nvidia that allowed the Sony PlayStations and the Nintendos of the world to go on those successive jumps in terms of video quality. So that was really the main driver at the time.
Sure. And since then, and moving from gaming as a sector to just being the chip that powers all of these fantastic AI applications, did you anticipate this sort of meteoric rise? And if you did, I'd like to know a little bit more about, what you think has led to this, in your opinion.
Did I really think it was going to be this big? No, I did not. But I would say Jensen was very early, much like Amazon was on cloud computing. Jensen bet early on AI being a big thing, and then something called ChatGPT came along, and suddenly it just exploded like a mushroom. And because he had such a big lead, has a lot of software cores, which make it easy to develop around it, but also hard to replace. You should give him the lead in the pole position for forever, really, in AI. I don't see how anybody can really catch him at the top end.
Sure. And as an investor, what are your medium to long-term expectations from this stock? I mean, are these highs really sustainable?
Well, as I said, sometimes you get overpaid in investment and sometimes you get underpaid. I do feel like I didn't think it was going to go up. What I think somebody said 500,000% since the IPO, and obviously I wish I'd never sold one share. But hindsight is brilliant. But is our largest position. So, and I think it'll still remain our largest position as long as I believe that we're still pretty early in this transition. At some point, and I'm talking hopefully 5 years from now, the growth rates are going to slow, and Nvidia will be more of a trading stock, my guess. But I just think we're early enough in that process that we don't have to worry about that yet.
Nvidia's quick rise to the top of the tech value, or rather valuation chain, only means the race is heating up. Analysts believe that over the next year, the race to the $4 trillion market cap in tech will be front and center between Nvidia, Apple, and Microsoft. Daniel Ives of Wedbush Securities said the AI revolution begins with Nvidia, and he said that this AI party is just getting started, as it's 9 p.m. in a party that's going to go on till 4 a.m. with the rest of the tech world only joining in now. He said it's all about the pace of data center AI-driven spending, as the only game in town for GPUs to run generative AI applications all go through Nvidia. He called Nvidia and Microsoft the first derivatives of the AI revolution, with the second, third, fourth derivatives of AI now starting to form in this market. There's no taking away from the rise of Nvidia, a company that many of us may not have even known about up until recently. A company that made a super chip that everyone wants a bite of. But as we begin to try and fathom the potential of AI, these GPUs are only going to get more precious and Nvidia more powerful. It'll be exciting to see how the company plays its cards over the next few months. Its continued success, though, hinges on its ability to sustain growth and fend off competition. And we at TMB will be keeping a watch on both and bringing you the latest. Thank you, Bob. It's Thursday, June 20th. I'm your host, Diya Rekhi, and you were listening to this episode on the Morning Brief from the Economic Times. This episode was produced by Vinayak Agarwal, sound editor Amrit Redji, executive producers Anirban Chaudhary and Arijit Burman. The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday and Friday. Do tune in to ET Play for all audio content, including the Morning Brief. You can listen to our podcast on all major podcast streaming platforms. Thank you for listening and have a nice day ahead. All external sound clips used in this episode belong to their respective owners. Credits are mentioned in the description.